In the codependency triangle, there's three ways we control others. The first one, like you mentioned, is the victim mindset. The victim is a manipulation tactic that tries to get people to do what we want them to do, but we use it, our victim, our victim status. And again, there are people that we've all been victimized at some point, right? But when we're stuck in that state of mind, and we operate consistently from that, we learn how to get what we want through a form of manipulation. That's not true love and connection. Another one is called the rescuer, where we need to come in and save everyone from their problems. But that's not our job. That's codependency. Rescuing people actually enables behavior. So if you're in a relationship where you're trying to rescue someone from, whether it be drug addiction or alcohol addiction or whatever it is, you're actually doing a disservice to that person, continuously trying to rescue them. Is called the persecutor. And that was typically me. I was the one that would puff myself up and raise my voice and come across as intimidating. And three forms that we use to control others.
Welcome back to the Power and Purpose podcast. I am your host, Vanessa Soul. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Thank you for investing your time, your energy, your attention into tuning in. I don't take it lightly. I know that there's so many things in our modern day world that's fighting for our attention, fighting for our energy. And sometimes we could feel scattered and we're not sure where we can invest our energy, where we'll actually get value. So I am so glad that you're here. I am super excited for today's guest. We have Steven Francisci. He is an author, mental health advocate, disabled veteran, and trauma awareness educator. Through therapy, self-reflection, and the courage to question deeply held beliefs, Steven rebuilt his life and now helps others heal from conditioning, shame, and inherited identities. I am super excited for this conversation. So first off, Steven, thank you so much for being here today.
It's great to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Who are you, and who are you not in this moment?
I think on a philosophical level, who I am, after I pulled back all the layers of conditioning, I believe that I am love at the core of who I am. I think that's who we all are, but a lot of us have a lot of conditioning, trauma, and fears that cover up everything that we were initially born with. So when we came out of the womb, we didn't have any of that, except, unless, we're talking about generational trauma and some of the genetics, but ultimately I believe we're all love, and that's what we're trying to get back to. What I'm not is, I'm not my trauma. I am not the layers of conditioning that were placed on me, not just in this lifetime, but in past generations. I am not the story that gets repeated to us in our minds. So when I get back to mindfulness, being in the present moment of who I am, I think I'm truly love, and I try to operate from that value. Thus having the tattoo on my hand, love, which is my number one value, and that's how I try to live my life.
Wow, that's so incredible. Thinking about my journey and so many other journeys of other people's that I hear, whether it's my friends or clients or other guests that come on the show, there's always like this finale that we talk about, or that tends to happen, like where things they weren't working with that identity that you had built, or the conditioning that you were still operating in. Before you start to transition and dismantle that conditioning, what did your life look like? Who was Steven at that point? And then how did you shift into the Steven that was no longer trapped or restrained by the conditioning?
I want to be honest about who I was, because I think that's important to show the contrast as to who I am today. Quite frankly, I was an a-hole. I was highly narcissistic. I was full of shame, and I operated out of a place of looking for validation in every place I could find it. I struggled with different, forms of addiction, whether it be chasing women and, eating food. I had, unhealthy relationship with food for a while. Drugs, not as much, but alcohol for sure. And spending money, all these different things that we look to do to try to fill the void is what I had to start letting go of and start developing more healthier coping mechanisms in life. I was just not, and I was not a good man. I wasn't a present father. But there wasn't one particular moment that happened for me. There was a series of events that happened to me. Starting back, I can go back as far as May 23rd of 2015. My second daughter was born. She was 8 days old. I was a biker at the time, and my buddy invited me to go to lunch. And I was riding down the main boulevard where I live here in Virginia. And I was in a near fatal motorcycle accident and, broke about every bone in my face. I was left, I was unconscious, and it happened right next to a local hospital, but the trauma was so bad that they had to take me down to the trauma center in Norfolk, Virginia. And so I had maxillofacial surgery. I had a plate put in my face with 20 screws. And so from there, I was already struggling with weight and shame and didn't know it, but I believe that was the first step in challenging my identity at the time. So at the time, I was, making well into six-figure money. I had a lot of power. I was a GM of a company, and I lost all of that. And then within that next year, I was struggling in my marriage. I had a lot of challenges there. And in 2016 was the second close event that kind of was an awakening, and I had a close call with suicide. I nearly took my life in, I think it was September of 2016.
Oh, wow.
So those were two events that happened, and then 2018, my marriage finally did end. But I still couldn't see myself for who I was. I was still operating on a very low energy vibrational level. I was still filled with shame, even though I had been in counseling for a number of years already. I was also a Christian at the time, so I was going to Christian therapy, and I want to be clear, I'm not attacking anyone that's Christian because it's a valid path to the divine. It's just no longer my path. I went through a deconstruction process that started over the last 6 or 7 years. I did end up getting remarried, and at the time I was an evangelical as well, still. That was back in 2021. And then again, I started seeing the patterns of religion and how it didn't seem like, hey, this doesn't feel like love. This feels a lot like control, and there was a lot of things that were still coming up in me too. And at some point I had to look in the mirror, and I was like, I can't blame anyone else. It has to be me. So I really dove in. I got away I was going to Christian counseling, and I got into trauma informed counseling, where I started meeting with a VA therapist who's been amazing. And that was the moment that I was like, oh my God, I am really narcissistic. And that's not who I want to be. So that there were still more moments, but those were some of the big moments that started the transition out of being an a-hole and more towards being all right.
Incredible journey so far. Was it disorienting, or was it or were you just kind of taking it day by day and trusting your path? Or was it something else? How did it feel?
It felt very disorienting. That is definitely part of the experience, as I would say, for going through an awakening. During that time when I started deconstructing my religious beliefs and conditioning. So to be clear, I grew up Catholic in New York City. And then when I went into the military and came down to Virginia, I got swept into the evangelical culture here I would say, the South. And so I stayed in this journey for years and years and years. So like as you start deconstructing those beliefs, not just around religion, but then you start questioning your relationship with others, your family members, how you view politics, all these things started to kind of crumble. And it's actually really scary and frightening. The way I viewed the world was just so unsteady, and it was destabilizing is probably one of the best words I can come up with as you go through this journey. And some would call it a midlife crisis, some would call it a spiritual awakening, some say a dark night of the soul. I had probably several of all of those. It felt like it was freaking awful. But it was a necessary experience in order for me to grow into the human being I am today.
And because it was so disorienting, and I think that this is Steven's journey, but many of us go through this. Not all of us. I've talked to some people who've had spiritual awakenings and they just read a book and they felt like they were enlightened and they changed their life from reading a book. They didn't have some of the more intense experiences. So take this for what you will, but once that disorienting energy started to dissolve, if it did, what was on the other side of that? Was it clarity? Was it just confidence? Was it faith? What was on the other side of that?
Out of all of that was letting go of anything being certain. I had to get comfortable with uncertainty. So I also had to realize that I do believe in karma. I do believe that the energy I put out there in the world and energy that was put out there in previous generations, I believe someone is going to pay for that one way or another. And I believe I was reaping a lot of my karma that I put out there probably in my 20s and 30s. I mean, I was a jerk. I was a really angry dude, a lot of rage, people were afraid of me. And then, as you start coming out the other side, I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen because a lot of times we're trying to control the outcome of how things are going to turn out. And we use manipulation tactics. We use a lot of control tactics. Codependency, gets in the middle of all that. But sitting down and saying, I don't know what's going to happen and it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm present. I show up with love and I show up with kindness and I give space for people to talk to me and I give an ear and I actually listen closely to what people have to say so I can understand their experiences. And then from there, it's all about connection at that point is letting go of certainty and getting comfortable with uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen in life, but developing the values is what's important.
I mean, that was my biggest struggle as well, is detaching from that desperate need for the illusion of certainty and control. I'm so excited to hear more about your memoir, and it's called From A-Hole to All Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
It's from a-hole to all right, a life rewritten through self-reflection, therapy, and conscious change. Self-reflection is just the ability to look at yourself in the mirror, and some would call it doing some shadow work. It's not, something that's extremely hard to do, but it's about really questioning why you do the things you do. So a lot of times for me, when it was coming to not being faithful in relationships, like, why do I do that? Where's that coming from? And then as you start going down and down and down, you get into the roots of your pain, which is typically in childhood. So we have to go back and say, what happened to me or what didn't happen to me in childhood that led me to the behaviors I operate in today? And a lot of times is, maybe physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, or a combination of all of those. And for me, I had a lot of that combined. And so I felt internally worthless. And the only way I thought I could get my worth was by um, being an overachiever, having status, wealth, power. And that's not where your worth comes from. Your worth comes from being consistent with yourself and others, having integrity, and showing up again with love and kindness consistently with others. And that's how I showed up for myself.
And when you're doing your work and you're sharing your message about conditioning and the process of releasing conditioning or dismantling it, or even just acknowledging our conditioning, sometimes we just got to see what was going on, like what's in my program before we can start to choose to release it. What are some of what's the feedback that you get from people? Is it fear, or do they get defensive? Are they more curious? How do people kind of receive this topic or this message?
I think it depends on the level of trauma someone that has experienced, because we can't connect with someone that doesn't trust anyone. And if you grew up around complex trauma, people are typically not going to trust you. So the only way to, develop trust is just to be consistent, be gentle. And that's what I've had to do with my own children. I had to show them that I am safer And, safety doesn't come by saying I'm safe. Safety comes by creating the environment where people actually feel safe. So that's the big difference. And so I get a lot of people that can hear what I'm talking about. And some of the people that have started on the journey are like, oh yeah, I know what Steve's talking about. And some people are, just think sometimes that I'm some Looney Tune talking about stuff, and they're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I've been called names, and I do believe in, masculine, feminine energy, and men getting more in touch with their emotional side, their softer side. And that's not about being male or female. It's just a different type of energy. Masculine energy is way more logical. We're in our mind. And when we want to heal, we have to learn to heal from the bottom up. So it's learning to feel our emotions again.
What opportunities have opened up in your life now? What experiences are you having with in relationships or with your family, or like what is a part of your reality now that you don't think you would have ever had access to if you would have locked yourself into that identity?
So this is 10 years worth of work that's been happening. Again, I published my book, and that has created an opportunity for more discussion, which is great. I was appointed by the city of Chesapeake on the board. I'm on the board of directors for Chesapeake Integrated Behavioral Healthcare, which is a community services board where we help folks who need services. So I help on that advisory board. I'm also a court-appointed special advocate. I advocate for abused and neglected children here in the city. And most recently, I haven't, since my accident and my, close call with suicide 2016, I haven't actually worked for earned income as a disabled veteran. But I was just accepted to Old Dominion University's graduate program to become a clinical counselor. So that's supposed to start in August, but I got to get funding for that. And I have this wonderful community on social media, mainly on Instagram, but I'm on Facebook, TikTok, Threads. I got YouTube Shorts going now. So I just have access to all these folks that are looking for some help, and I have the opportunity to serve people in a way that feels fulfilling to me. So
That's so beautiful. I'm just like, I'm relating to your experience and your transformation in so many ways, because there was a period of time where I was really in that. This is probably not the best term, you guys, so don't attack me for it, but this is just how I see it. There was like this dark feminine energy of manipulation that I was in for a while, just kind of manipulating, and not necessarily the narcissist, but I would like use the victim role to even manipulate even more. And so so just being like, we're just being honest, right? Like, and this a lot like these characteristics, yeah, it comes from our upbringing and our trauma responses. Are we stuck in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, or flop, or like where are we at, or what protective identities have we created because of the trauma, because of the difficult situations that we weren't able to fully process? And I think about now, like my 360 coming out of that energy of being like very manipulative or playing the role of the victim or whatever it was. Not to say all victims are playing the role of the victim. I'm speaking from my experience. I was leveraging it personally. But on the other side of that was just this feeling of oneness with the world, with other people, with God, whoever you decide or however you see that as the one consciousness, just that love. Even when you showed me that tattoo on your wrist, it's just like I like love is now able to be self-generated. I don't need to manipulate for it or play a victim to get that illusion of love. It's like it's this pure form of love that's like oozing out of me. And I gotta reset my habits, so I make sure I'm doing my meditation and I have my moments where I'm by myself, because that's where I really regenerate and I can access deeper levels of it. But I don't know if you have any comments on it, because this might help someone else, any of the listeners, as they're processing their own before and after, where they were were they at Ahole and now they're all right, or whatever their journey is. It helps them process like how far we've come, right? And how grateful we could be for our everyday experiences and what we're able to what we're able to access. Any thoughts on that?
Thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge something that you did earlier on in this moment that you were just talking, is that you acknowledged that you operated from a victim mindset or a victim state of consciousness. And that's sometimes the first way that folks can say, hey, if you're being honest with yourself and say, you know what, I had played the victim, and I used that to guilt people into getting what I want. So one thing that I've learned along my journey is something called the codependency triangle. And in the codependency triangle, there's three ways we try to control others. The first one, like you mentioned, is the victim mindset. The victim is a manipulation tactic that tries to get people to do what we want them to do, but we use it, our victim, our victim status. Or, and again, there are people that we've all been victimized at some point, right? But when we're stuck in that state of mind and we operate consistently from that, we learn how to get what we want through a form of manipulation. And that's not true love and connection. Another one is called the rescuer, where we need to come in and save everyone from their problems. But that's not our job. That's codependency, and rescuing folks is not what we're supposed to do. As a matter of fact, rescuing people actually enables behavior. So if you're in a relationship where you're trying to rescue someone from whether it be drug addiction or alcohol addiction or whatever it is, you're actually doing a disservice to that person,
Yeah.
continuously trying to rescue them. And then the third one is called the persecutor. And that was typically me. I was the one that would puff myself up and raise my voice and come across as intimidating. And I learned that early on in childhood because I was bullied a lot. And then I was also, experienced a lot of unhealthy dynamics in my own home. So I learned to puff up, and I got really big for a while. I was a big, heavy weightlifter, and that was my way of striking fear into people just by dealing with me. My energy was very intimidating, but it was about control. And so those are three forms that we use to control others. So I'm glad to hear you acknowledge that. And I think the best way for people to learn is to have these honest conversations so people can hear our experiences and learn from them. And it's great to hear you say that. So, but as you start recognizing when you're doing the things, when you get done in an interaction with someone, whether it's your partner, your friend, your family, you say, how did I show up in that? Was I trying to rescue here, or was I being a victim? And then you start questioning yourself and how you showed up in that conversation. You say, you know what, I did that thing again. And you don't shame yourself for it. You say, I get it. I did it. And you give yourself love and compassion. You say, I'm going to do better next time. And you keep doing that. And it's a practice. And the more you do it, the more you notice when you're being controlling. And eventually you're able to start letting control go.
Yes. Thank you for that share. One quick little check-in I do for myself, and sometimes I ask myself, was that my most authentic response? And sometimes I'm like, no, you know, so it really, and sometimes you won't know, you might have to sit with it for a couple of days and you'll figure it out later. But yeah, those are great check-ins. I love the self-awareness that we're bringing to this.
Even the question, it was that my most authentic self? The fact that you're asking the question is already a wonderful thing. But I would say, I think radical acceptance is something that I also brought into my life. That instead of sitting in doubt um, or worry of whether or not I was, being my most authentic self or my most loving self, I say to myself, this is the way I showed up, and it couldn't happen any other way. I accept it. And, if I don't like the outcome or what I've done, I could change it the next time moving forward in an interaction with someone.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if someone is listening to this today and they might be in the thick of their conditioning, right? And let's just say they have enough awareness to know, like they have the awareness, but maybe nothing about the behavior has shifted just yet. What I, I don't want to think as this, and I know it's not a linear process. So I'm going to say, what is the next step? But I know that that question makes it feel like it's a linear process. But like, what is your message? What is your insight for people who might be in that situation right now?
that are currently like feeling very depressed or like just stuck in a state of fear. I think I want to be careful on how I, give my tips here because one thing I think is very important is to seek professional help. There's a lot of times that even in the religious communities that I used to belong to, that pastors were trying to do jobs that they should not have been doing. It's best to, advise someone to seek professional help. There are resources out there. Um, so I want to say that, and of course, if you're ever, having suicidal ideations or you're that overwhelmed, dial 988, contact, they're there to support and help you here in the US. But otherwise, as far as what the next thing to do is just keep reading books. For me, one of the books that really helped me was From Surviving to Thriving. It's about complex PTSD by Pete Walker. Just want to mention that book. That was one that really helped me understand about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and how that shows up in our lives. But there's a lot of good resources out there. But what I would say is definitely just trust the process and be open to hearing perspectives outside of the ones you're used to. And I would also encourage you to seek friendships out, from people that you normally wouldn't. Because if we only are attracted to people that think like us, then we're only going to get basically a one or two dimensional idea of what our lives are like. So expand your and diversify your friend network.
And now I have another question that's along the same line. So that question was for the listener that's listening. And like I said, they're aware that they're in like a lot of this old conditioning, trauma patterns, things like that. But for the person who is already, maybe they're already slightly shifting. They do have the professional help. They're not as much in the depressive state or suicidal state that they might have been in. They're not doing the violence or like whatever. They're kind of like, again, this is not a linear process, you guys, but they're kind of like deeper into their process of shifting. They're getting, here's the term I want to say. They're more intentional. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
I'm like, God, give it to me. They're more intentional about discovering who their authentic self is outside of the conditioning. What are, so besides reading and things like that, do you have any practices or tools or something that you do on a daily basis or anything like that?
I think this, along with trauma and therapy, I think is also deconstruction.
Yeah.
Deconstruction is such an important part of our lives because, again, the conditioning is what builds us into the belief systems we inherited today. And I really like, I want to mention another book that helped me out tremendously was a book called The Power of Myth by Stephen Campbell, I think his name is. But either way, I started thinking about our lives as a story. I don't want to get off track here, but deconstruction is really important. It's about questioning how you view relationships with others and yourself. Listening to that inner critic. How are you talking to yourself? When you do something that you may feel humiliated with or you feel ashamed about. Um, there's so many different. I don't have one particular approach because I've used so many different modalities. Um, yeah, I think probably.
Yeah, and the deconstruction, I mean, I think that's the strongest recommendation. So I'll just echo what you said
Yeah,
as people are like really like soaking this up and like letting it land. Like, and the deconstruction is also shadow work, and it's also practices that help you get into the subconscious mind. So breath work, if you're doing like a group breathwork practice or someone who's guiding you through an extended breathwork practice that's like a full journey, that could really kind of help you get below that conscious mind, the ego, the identities, the protective identities, the managers. If you guys know, I used to do IFS therapy, internal family system. So when you get beyond all of those and you get into that subconscious mind, that's also if you're still in the middle of that shift and you're like, I'm tempted to run back because it's so familiar, but I'm already doing the work. I'm already working with a therapist. I'm already deep in it. I just need more access to what's inside than what Steven suggested and what I suggested. I think it's perfect.
I do want to also add journaling is incredibly powerful. So that was something that I used to hate to do until I realized the power of journaling. There's something about the mind and the hand. When you start writing, it slows everything down because you're literally thinking, and it drops you more into your body and allows you to feel those feelings. So when you start journaling about something that's happened to you, and just don't even think, just write, and let whatever's in your spirit come out and flow onto paper. And you would be surprised at what comes out and how amazing and cathartic that experience can be. So I would want to encourage folks to also, incorporate a journaling practice into their lives. Um, some other things that are really helpful too is, art therapy. I've gotten into art over the last few years. Not very good at it, but it's a way to express what's going on inside of us and just put it on paper. And I think that's part of maybe the gifts of some of our traumas is we can express it in creative ways. For me, I choose
Yeah.
to write my memoir, and then again, I do artwork and I do other creative ideas. I've done silly videos on Instagram where I put a wig on and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put in my acting skills and I'm going to play the man and the woman, and I just try to figure out ways on how to relay a message that can, resonate with people.
Yeah, yeah. Can I share something with you about the art therapy?
Yeah.
In 2020, my girlfriend and I were doing, we just it was 2020, it was COVID. We're on a rooftop. We're just trying to hang out and have fun when the world is going through a chaotic moment. So she had all these canvases and paints and things, and we're thinking, and we had snacks, and we made it like a whole event. We're thinking we're gonna have fun. And it actually ended up being a shadow work process that I'm so grateful for, because I got to see in real time how critical I was of myself. And we had no intention. It was just like, hey, let's just paint. You're on that side, I'm on this side, and let's just see what comes through and enjoy each other's company. There was no, goal or destination. But that's when I realized, like, wow, I'm criticizing every color I'm using, every stroke of paint, direction I go in. And then I started crying. Like, I broke down. I laugh about it because it was such a powerful process. And of course, we turned it into like girlfriend sharing time. And I got to share with her about how critical I had been. That was someone I trusted. I still do. We've been friends for 13 years. So, here we are thinking we're going to have a fun art project. And it helped me literally deconstruct that self-criticism that had been haunting me for like 35 years.
And you know what? Even when you had that voice and that self-critical voice of the way you choose colors or the way what clothes you pick for the day, or I don't wear makeup. I would say what makeup you put on, whether you like it or not. Then you say, okay, whose voice is this? Is this my voice? And then is this the voice of a caregiver? Is this the voice of someone from earlier on in my childhood? So you have to start questioning whose voice really is this that's talking to me? Because a lot of times we inherit what we pick up in childhood and we start
Yeah.
doing that to ourselves. So
Yeah, and then I figured out whose voice it was, and then I went into therapy 2 weeks later
there you go.
for that specific intention, right? So
Yeah.
so you guys really soak this in. This could lead you on a whole journey, like whatever's resonating in this episode. Really, really let it land for you. So amazing stuff. Again, if this resonates with you, check out Steven's memoir. From Ahole to All Right. And you gave us so many book recommendations already. I typically ask people to give us book recommendations towards the end, but do you have a quote, either your own quote that you've made up, or a popular quote that you would like to leave us with?
I try to keep my life as simple as possible in all situations, whether it be my children, relationships, friendship, is love leading disconnection. And that's it. I just keep it simple. And however I show up, or is this loving? If I'm talking, if I'm, maybe in an argument with my partner, am I showing up as the most loving self that I could be right now? So
Yes.
yeah. So that's just an easy thing to remember. Is
Yes.
and it's something that you can integrate into your own life. So
Yes, I love it. I love it. It's just as powerful, if not more, than any of the quotes that I was thinking about. What is one powerful way that people can work with you? And I'm just going to let you guys know we have all of Steven's links below that you could just click on. It'll take you directly to multiple of his pages that he has available. But Steven, what's one way that people can work with you deeper?
one of the ways you can DM me on Instagram or TikTok or Threads or Facebook and any of those platforms, and I'm on YouTube as well. I used to have a support group. I'm thinking about bringing that back. I haven't done that yet with a few things that are going on, but one of the things I do have is I have a community on Instagram that is getting active again, and so yeah, Instagram. So my Healing Roots on up. My channel. You can join us on there. And I plan to try to expand what I offer right now. Everything I do right now as a disabled veteran, I offer all the insights and the work that I do. It's at no cost to anyone. The only thing that supports the work that I do right now is the book that I published. And that is available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and a lot of other major online retailers.
Amazing, amazing. I love it that you have so many free resources. That's just it just makes it so accessible for all of us. So thank you, thank you. And thanks, Stephen, for coming on the show today, for your time, your energy, and your wisdom. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be on the show, and yeah, I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. And to all the listeners, thanks again for listening to this episode, especially if you made it to the end. And if you thought of someone in particular, just think of one person. You might think of them later on today while you're driving. Just think of one person who really needs to hear some of the wisdom and the insight that we shared in today's episode. You never know what people are dealing with behind the scenes. Not everyone shares with what they're going through or struggling with, and just sending them this episode, if you've thought about them recently or if they came up in your mind, send them a sweet little message. Hey, I was thinking about you today. You might want to check out this podcast episode and you might enjoy it. So do me that favor. Thank you everyone. Subscribe and check us out for next week's episode. Thank you so much. Namaste and have a great day.